This bivy bag that I've just crawled out from isn't as roomy as a tent and it's not as versatile as a tarp. So is there even any point in one? A bivy bag, otherwise known as a bivy sack, is a compact and lightweight waterproof bag designed to protect you and your sleeping bag from the elements. The name comes from the French word bivouac, which means temporary shelter. These shelters were originally designed for mountaineers who were willing to compromise on comfort for less weight and size. So if they are good enough for mountaineers, are they any good for hiking and backpacking? My name's Zeb, and I've just spent the night out here camping in my bivy bag. Now I quite enjoy sleeping in a bivy bag, but they're not the most ideal shelter. They've definitely got some pros and some advantages, but they've also got some cons, which I feel makes them not the best standalone shelter. Now on the surface, bivy bags seem like an awesome choice. A waterproof sack that you can throw your sleeping gear into, crawl in, and you're good to go. You can weather any storm. Well, not quite. It's the same story with rain jackets, but when you have a waterproof sack with you inside of it generating heat, that's going to cause condensation and moisture to build up. To negate that, we need a waterproof breathable fabric. But waterproof breathable fabrics are tricky. Even the most breathable of those types of fabrics is never going to be able to stop all the condensation buildup. Well, that's my coffee done. I was enjoying that. Probably the biggest issue with the bivy bag is condensation buildup, especially if you're sleeping out under the stars like I did last night. Like right now, for example, my sleeping bag is damp. It's not soaking wet, and it's definitely not as wet as it would have been if I'd just lain out under the stars, but it is damp, and that's just from all the condensation. I had the zip on my bivy bag open at two ends, and I could feel a bit of breeze coming through the bag, but even still, it wasn't enough to negate the condensation. Before we dive into all the flaws and disadvantages of the bivy bag, I just want to talk about the pros and the things that I really like about it. So first things first, it's a sack. I throw my sleeping bag in and lay down pretty much anywhere. If there's a flat spot where it's big enough for me to lie down in, I can throw the bivy bag there as well. So that's a big advantage of them. They have a very minimal footprint, and their footprint is basically only as big as you. Another great thing about them is their low profile design. Some of them have a bit of a hoop at one end. Sure, that does raise them up a little bit, but generally they're just a flat sack and they're only as high as your sleeping bag pretty much. That means they're going to be a lot more sheltered from windy environments. Last night, for example, it was quite a breeze coming through here. It wasn't super high winds, but there was a decent gust coming through. With the bivy bag, I barely noticed it. If I stood up, I could definitely notice the wind more, but down low at this level, just lying on the ground, it was hardly noticeable. I probably had my best night's sleep in this bivy bag than I have compared to any other windy times I've been in a tent or a tarp. If you're stealth camping or trying to spend the night unnoticed, then a bivy bag, really good choice. Their low profile means that you're probably less likely to be seen. Ease of setup is another great thing about bivy bags. You can basically just roll them out and you're good to go. Blow up your sleeping mat and that's your shelter set up. For example, this bivy bag does require that hoop, so there is one additional extra step, and I have put a stake in either end. That's just because of the wind last night. So this type of bivy bag requires the most setup, and it's hardly anything at all. You can have it up in less than a minute. So if you want something super easy to just throw on the ground, it's easier to set up, and it'll provide you with peace of mind knowing it's gonna give you some protection, then a bivy bag, really good choice. Now obviously, because they're just a sack and they don't have much setup to them, most bivy bags you'll find aren't going to be that heavy, and they're going to be significantly lighter than a tent. They fit a nice middle ground, being lighter and slightly more compact than most tents, but not quite as light and a little bit bulkier than most tarps. Although bivy bags meet that nice middle ground in terms of weight and size, in terms of performance, I do feel like they're lacking a wee bit. This is where we can start to run into a few problems. You see, although they're lighter and generally more compact than a tent, they don't provide nearly as much protection. Camping in the rain in a bivy bag, especially without the hoop there, you're gonna have the rain pounding on your face and you're gonna get some crazy condensation buildup. It's not exactly the most comfortable time. Now, personally, I love tarps. I tarp camp most of the time. They're a super versatile shelter. And if you want to see why I love tarps so much, I've made a video on it. You can check it out up there. Now, a bivy bag is generally heavier and bulkier than a tarp, but they're not as versatile. I can set up a tarp a lot more ways than I can set up a bivy bag. And although I can throw a bivy bag in just about any flat area or place that I can lie, I can pretty much do the same with a tarp as well. The setup might require a bit more time and require a bit more thought to try to get my tarp shelter set up, but I can pretty much fit it anywhere. You might be able to tell, but there's not a lot of space in here. I can fit my sleeping bag, my sleeping mat, maybe a few extra clothes, and like my electronics bag up in the front here. But I've had to leave my pack outside. Now, for me personally, that's not a huge deal. I make sure all the things that I really don't want to get wet are protected, either in their own dry bag or a Ziploc bag or something. And if it's things like my electronics, I'll keep them in the bivy bag with me. That means the rest of my stuff is out in my pack. With a bivy bag, you pretty much just have to accept that fate and know that you're probably gonna wake up with a wet, damp pack in the morning. Now, another thing to keep in mind with a bivy bag is if you're claustrophobic, they can feel very confining, especially if it's bad weather and you have to zip them up all the way. You're inside that tiny little space, so if you don't do well in small spaces, then a bivy bag probably isn't the best shelter choice for you. Now, although the bivy bag does have some advantages, at this point in the video, you're probably wondering, what's the point in them? Now, bivy bags can be a really good choice, especially if you like cowboy camping or sleeping under the stars, and you just want something to give you a bit more protection. But if you know you're gonna be heading into bad weather, then they're definitely not the best standalone choice. They can make an excellent emergency shelter, and if it's all you've got, you can definitely spend the night out in them. If weight and size is a priority, personally, I'd choose a tarp shelter. And if I want something that's gonna be able to handle a lot more harsher weather and give me a more comfortable, roomier space, I'm gonna pick a tent. When I use a bivy bag, I go into it understanding the pros and the cons. I know they're not the greatest standalone shelter, but at the same time, they're also fun to use. I just had a great night out in mine. Now, a really good shelter combo that some people are a fan of is using a bivy bag in conjunction with a tarp shelter. That's gonna give you a best of both worlds. You're gonna get a really nice open feeling with nature. You're not gonna be super closed off like a tent, and you're gonna get the protection and space from a tarp shelter, but also protect yourself from any bugs and splashback with the bivy bag. Now, that sounds like a really nice combination. But if you're using a tarp shelter and a full bivy bag like this, then you're not really saving any weight. Combine those two shelters together and you might as well carry a tent. Sure, it's not gonna be as open to nature, but if the weather's really bad, I'd rather be able to just close the tent up anyway. If the weather's nice, I can still unzip the tent and enjoy nature around me. So personally, I don't really see much point in carrying a proper bivy bag like this and a tarp shelter. I might as well just carry the tent. In saying all this, a bivy bag can be an excellent choice if you're gonna be camping or bivvying under a rock shelter or some sort of natural shelter. I was on an ice climbing course and we spent 4 nights camping under this giant rock. It was a really cool place for our camp and provided a nice big shelter for everyone. Now, some moisture and wind did still get into that rock bivvy. It's a natural shelter and it was still a bit open to the elements. That's where the bivy bag came in. We all threw down our sleeping gear with our bivy bags. We had the big protection of the rock shelter, but the bivy bag just provided that extra bit of security, especially because it was the middle of winter and we were out there for an extended period of time. So if you've got a trip planned where you know you're gonna be spending it under a rock bivvy or some sort of natural formation or shelter, then the bivy bag can be a really good choice to take. That's personally where I think they shine. If I know I'm gonna be sleeping under a rock biv, then the bivvy is a good choice because it just provides that little bit extra protection. I'm not gonna be setting up a tarp or a tent under a natural shelter like that, but the bivy bag I can just roll out with the rest of my gear and it provides that little bit more security. So is there any point to a bivy bag? Well, the type of shelter you choose is gonna depend on the type of weather, terrain, and environment you're heading into. Personally, for most of my trips, I'm generally gonna find myself leaning towards either a tarp shelter or a tent. Sometimes I'll do a trip like this where I know I just want to specifically come out to spend the night in the bivy bag. On a trip like that, I understand the pros and the cons, and I know what I'm getting myself into. I'm also not using this shelter for an extended trip or an extended period of time. If I was doing that, I'd have to be drying out my gear along the way. So I do still think bivy bags have their place, but as a standalone shelter, I don't think they're the best option. Whether that's used in conjunction with something like a tarp or a natural rock formation, they can be a really good choice. But I just think they have too many drawbacks and downsides to be used by themselves. Bivy bags can also be a good choice for mountaineering trips when you're generally above the bush line and in alpine conditions. For those types of trips, they're great because if you're trying to save weight, then you're not going to want to be taking a tarp shelter into those sorts of environments. It's going to be hard to set up in alpine or rocky conditions. And if it's a climbing trip, there might not be that much room to set up for the night. You might not be able to fit the tent up there. So that's where a bivy bag can be a really good choice. For general hiking or camping, I don't think they're the best option, but for more alpine or mountaineering trips, then I do think they shine a little bit more. Now, does that mean I'm gonna throw my bivy bag out? No, I'm still gonna use it. I'm gonna come out on short wee overnights like this, spend the night under the stars with that little bit of extra protection. Last night, I wouldn't have wanted to be cowboy camping. My bag was gonna be totally soaking wet, and that wind was gonna hit me and cool me down a lot. So the bivy bag was really nice to have. But like I said before, this was a trip where I specifically knew I was coming out to use the bivy bag. So do you think bivy bags are worth it? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. At the end of the day, as long as the type of shelter you use works for you and your type of hiking or outdoor adventures, then that's all that matters. Hike your own hike, stay safe, and have fun. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope you found the video useful. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.